Welcome to the Company of Dads podcast, where we explore the sweet, sublime, strange, and silly aspects of being a lead dad in a world where men often feel they have to hide or at least not talk about their parenting role. One thing I know from personal experience is being a lead dad is not a traditional role for men, whether you work full-time, part-time, or devote all your time to your family. Parenting is so often left to mothers or paid caregivers. But here at the Company of Dads, our goal is to shake all that off and create a community for fathers who are lead dads, and to welcome other dads who want to learn more from them. I'm your host, Paul Sullivan, and today my guest is Stuart Friedman, Practice Professor of Management Emeritus at the Wharton Business School and the Director of Wharton's Work-Life Integration Project. Stu is best known for a program called Total Leadership, which he developed after taking a leave from Penn to work for the Ford Motor Company in 1999. When he returned, what he learned not only became a popular course at Wharton, but spawned a consulting company of the same name. Stu is the author of many books, but the most relevant for us are Baby Bust, Work and Family, and Parents Who Lead. His PhD is not in economics, finance, or business, but in organizational psychology. Stu, welcome to the Company of Dads podcast.
So great to be here. Thanks for having me, Paul.
You started the Work-Life Integration Project in 1991, shortly after you became a father yourself. But that was pretty early on to think about those things. We consider it all commonplace now, but that was really early back in 91. What prompted it, and what was the reception like early on?
Well, when my first child was born in 1987, I was a few years into my professor life at Wharton. I was doing research on leadership development and chief executive officer succession and talent management. And I was writing about that, doing lectures and workshops on that subject. But I'd also studied at the University of Michigan adult development, role theory, and the early ideas about how the different roles that we play in life affect each other. So I was interested in that
when you
topic
say the roles, meaning like the gender roles or the expectation that the roles that people will play?
Well, how being in a family affects who you are at work and vice versa, and in your community. So social roles that you take up as a father, as a worker, as a friend. So role theory was an aspect of social psychology and sociology that really started to take hold in the 60s, that was developing these ideas about role conflict, and how those are managed in institutions and society and for each of us individually. So I was always interested in that subject, but it wasn't what I was mainly focused on. But then when my first child was born, and I was just transformed in my own role identities as I took on this new aspect of life as a father, I was just consumed with the question of how I was going to make the world a safe one for this precious, helpless little being to grow up in. And I couldn't get that question out of my head, or in all the conversations I was having immediately after his arrival, including in my Wharton MBA classroom, when I asked students, what are you going to do to help create a world that's going to be a safe and nurturing one for not just the next generation of talent in your business, but for, people in the world.
Yeah.
And what does that mean for you personally? And
this is the late 80s. So I'm going to guess
this is 87.
Not a lot of people said go into ESG or something green. They probably said we're going to make a lot of money. Or what was the response you got?
Well, that was the era of greed is good.
Yeah.
And I remember that conversation in that classroom now, what was it, 36 years ago, quite vividly, because it changed everything for me. When I raised that question, there were people who were quite angry that I was taking time.
Angry that you had asked them that question.
Yeah, like what are we talking about here? What does that have to do with business? I mean, why are you wasting our time on this, professor? Nobody cares about your family, by the way. And also, this was not the topic that we had prepared for class today. So, why are you doing this?
Yeah.
But there were others in the room who had, never been asked this question in a Wharton classroom, let alone, in conversations in their companies. And they were quite enthused about the idea of, wow, yeah, I've been thinking about this, men and women.
Yeah.
I'm glad you're raising this. And one student said, well, you're the professor, you tell us what we should be doing. And that's when I realized, maybe there's something I can do.
Right. Because to be honest, you didn't really have an answer yourself. You had just
I only had the question.
Had the question. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's, for 40 plus years, that's, how I've made my living, is by asking annoying questions of people. And that's, I think it's my superpower. I like to ask questions and that provoke. And in response to that, to that student, I realized, well, maybe there are some ways that I can develop using, the training that I've had and the opportunity that I have to do research and to experiment with some new ideas, that I could develop a body of knowledge or try to start to do that would be helpful to these people and others like them.
Yeah.
And that's what I started to do. And so I turned my attention to trying to understand, how can people find harmony among the different parts of their lives so that they can be the people that they want to be in all parts of their lives, including and especially as parents, but beyond that as well.
Yeah.
So that's what led me to shift the direction of my career.
Well, let me ask you this, because we got to take a step back and frame it as to, who you were in the late 80s, and who you were was, assistant professor Friedman? You didn't have tenure. You're starting out, you're a young guy, young family. This is risky stuff. It's one thing to raise a question in the class. It's another thing maybe to create a single class about it, but you then go ahead and start this, work-life integration project. How do you pitch that to, your superiors at Wharton?
With naive hope that this was going to be something that people would see as useful and important, and fortunately some did.
Yeah.
But there were certainly some that didn't. I can recall quite well one of the senior members of my department at that time, who when I told him, this is what I'm doing now,
Yeah.
and he said, "Stu, why are you like ruining your career by going to focus on something, this women's issue that nobody really cares about?" And I said, well, I think this is going to become a bigger issue over time for all companies, all people in our society, because it's just, you can see, I could see quite, it just was so obvious to me that as women grew in power and authority and influence in society and, business society, and as men were changing and thinking about how they didn't want to live the same lives that their fathers did, that that we're going to need some models, some tools to help people to adjust to a new kind of social reality. And that is certainly what has happened.
Yeah. And
so I got resistance, but I also, found corners of support, including from the dean of the Wharton School at that time, Tom Garrity, who said, yeah, this is good. We'll get you some money to get this thing going. And they did.
That's wonderful. And when you look back on this project that is now, 30 years old, 30 plus years old,
yeah.
What were the markers when you knew it was, working? When you look back, when you knew that you were sort of fighting these headwinds, and, what you were teaching these MBA students was working and having an impact on the way companies function?
It's really only recently that I can now look back over the course of 3 decades and realize, oh, this is now normal. As you said in the introduction, the issues that we were addressing, asking people to look at their lives from the point of view of the different roles that they're in and how those interact. When I went to Ford Motor Company in '99, after having started the Wharton Leadership Program in the same year that I started the Work-Life Integration Project. So those were both born at the same time. And it was really through the 90s that I was focusing on both of these issues. And at Ford, I was able to kind of marry the two of them to create a model for growth in leadership capacity that was about creating harmony among the different parts of your life to improve performance in all of them.
Mm-hmm.
And because of the opportunity that I had there to create a practical method for helping people to learn these ideas based on research that we've been doing through the Work-Life Integration Project in the 90s, studying, what does it take to find harmony, to create integration among the different parts of life. It was only when we started to enact the early versions of this model on a pretty broad scale at Ford and to iterate there that I began to see, oh, this is something that people really want to do. They're hungry for an opportunity to help themselves and the people around them figure out how to make adjustments in their lives so that they could live in a way that was more true to their values and to serve the interests beyond just their work lives. And when I saw that was working, and I came back to Wharton now 20 years ago, I thought, oh my gosh, I've got something here that everybody's going to love. But of course, very few people did because I now had to adapt to a different environment and figure out how to, design an experience that would fit within the structure of our curriculum. So that took a number of iterations. But once I started getting it right a few years in, and the student reaction, mainly again born of a real hunger of a new generation to be exploring these questions, and it wasn't happening. It wasn't normal to be talking about these questions even 20 years ago. So it was still fighting against, the tide, but it's certainly now in the last 5 to 10 years where there's just so many different people doing work in this arena. And it's now normal to be addressing these questions that I've come to see. This is now part of what is mainstream practice, and indeed the pandemic just accelerated that.
Yeah, let's back up a second because I want to talk about 1999 when you took a break, took a leave from Wharton to go to Ford. It was a classic chicken and egg question. How did that come about? Did you have some theories that you wanted to put in practice? Did somebody at Ford, reach out to you and say, Stu, we've heard you've been doing, can you help me? How did that happen? And what did you hope to achieve when you went into, this gigantic, iconic American company being Ford Motor?
One of my mentors from my Michigan days in the early 80s was Noel Tichy, and he had been working, he was the first head of General Electric's Crotonville Executive Ed Center with Jack Welch in the mid 80s, which became the model for, just so many companies throughout our country and around the world. A real visible, serious dedication to investing in people, in the growth of leaders. And he and I continued to do work together in corporate learning institutes that were now popping up all over the place. And I was very much involved in that through the 90s. And he was doing a project at Ford, and where the new CEO said to him, hey, I need somebody to help me do something like what you did, 15 years ago at General Electric. And Noel said, oh, I got just the guy for you. And so that was me. And that's how I got there.
Yep.
Now getting there and then figuring out how to, create value in that role was quite a journey, but that's the short answer to how I got there.
Yeah. But did you pick up sticks with your family and move from Philadelphia to Detroit for a couple of years?
Well, yes, the kids were 12, 9, and 6 at the time. They only lived in this one home where I'm currently sitting right now. And they were deeply rooted in that community.
They must have loved you for that, huh? Huh, Dad?
Well, my wife and I were both graduate students in the early 80s at the University of Michigan.
Yeah.
And so we loved that town, Ann Arbor, where we were we had no money, and we had a great life there, being in an extremely rich learning environment as graduate students. So we were happy to return there, but of course that meant pulling up stakes here. But what we did was to rent our home here, and then build, in Ann Arbor. So, the idea was, let's see how this goes.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll come back to Philadelphia, or maybe we won't. Because the University of Michigan also said, well, when you're done with Ford, you can join us. So there was that option as well. So we didn't really know. It was one grand experiment. And as you can infer, we returned.
Yeah.
But it was only after quite a lot of turmoil, because when we got there, it was not easy for them. And after about a half a year or so, the 3 kids were in unison saying, okay, let's go home now.
You brought them together. You brought, squabbling siblings together to stage a coup d'etat.
Not exactly. I'm portraying it in a way that is a lot more, smooth and systematic than it actually was. But it became clear that moving back was something that was going to be really important for them. So what happened in the second year, they moved back here. We sold that house in Ann Arbor, which we had built, and I then rented an apartment around the corner from my office in Dearborn, and then commuted from Dearborn to Philadelphia once or twice a week to come home. So that second year was really quite interesting, and involved all kinds of negotiations, and a lot of, but it was an extremely productive time.
But what comes out of that?
Did I answer your question?
You did, yeah. But what comes out of that? What comes out of that time is this program that you created, is a company as well, called Total Leadership. And so, in a couple of sentences for the listeners, explain, what Total Leadership is.
Total Leadership is about improving performance and results at work and at home, and in the community, and for yourself personally, your mind, your body, your spirit, by finding greater harmony among those different parts of life. And it involves 3 basic principles: to be real, to be whole, to be innovative. So to be real is to act with authenticity by clarifying what's most important to you, your values, your vision. You tell the stories of where you've come from, the events in your life that have shaped your values. You define what your vision looks like, what a day in your life looks like 15 years from now, and what you're doing and what impact you're having. You look at your current life and describe the 3 or 4 or 5 values that are most important to you, and where you invest your attention across the different domains, those 4 different parts, and do other assessments that help you to articulate for yourself and people around you what you care about most. So it begins with that. And that's the core of your growth as a leader, and what it means to integrate the different parts of life, knowing what matters most. And most people don't do that.
Yeah.
They don't do it enough. The second piece, to be whole, involves recognizing and respecting the whole person. And that means identifying the most important people in the different parts of your life, and then thinking about why they matter to you in your future, and what you expect and need from each other, and how well you're doing in meeting those needs and expectations. And then looking at your set of most important relationships in the different parts of your life and to see how they affect each other and how your social world is one that you can affect, you can influence. And so there's this, set of exercises that helps you to do that and to prepare then for conversations with these people, dialogues with the key stakeholders, as we call them, people who have a stake in your future, to help to clarify those expectations. And what most people discover in those conversations is that they have more trust and more support surrounding them than they had thought, that other people expect less of them and something different than what they were thinking about. And that is quite liberating.
When do we get to lower the bar? I love this. People expecting less of us. This is liberating.
Well, that's what happens in 80% of the cases, is that when you ask people, hey, this is what I think is most important to you. Do I have it right? These 3 or 4 things, what they hear in response, if they're doing these conversations well and practicing the skill of getting other people to be honest with them. And of course, every one of those conversations is different. And so it's an intensive clinic on how do you get people to tell you the truth, and to feel confident in expressing yours. What you learn is that what other people expect of you is a little less and a little different than what you thought. So you're right, Paul. It results in less pressure, less stress, and more confidence in your ability to try new things. And so that's the third principle, to be innovative, to experiment continually with how you get things done in a way that is intended to pursue what I call 4-way wins. And that is, again, improved performance in all the different parts. And so people then do experiments in the laboratory of their lives, and they learn all kinds of practical knowledge about how you create change that's indeed sustainable, because it works not just for you, not just for your family, not just for your professional or business life, not just for your community, but you're thinking actively, consciously, mindfully, and acting on pursuing positive change that works for all those different parts. And that's what people do. And then they reflect on what they discover from these experiments and generate new ideas for those, and just continue to practice that set of principles and tools.
If we were having this conversation, and if I was still at the New York Times, I was writing a story about this, or even for this pod, and you said you had just come up with this in the past 2 years, I would say, yes, Stu, that's amazing. This is great. You came up with this 20 years ago, and it's been building for 20 years. And so I have to ask, how did COVID change the way people look at total leadership? Or I guess I should say how people are receptive to total leadership. Has this been an amazing boon of people embracing these concepts? Yeah.
Well, it had been growing, with the demographic changes in our society, and the way that men and women think about their roles in society, and what businesses were coming to realize as it's important to invest in the development of your people. This was not an obvious idea to many companies when I got my PhD in 1984 in organizational psychology, but has grown over the course of my life as something that is now normal. So there've been a lot of changes, macro social changes that have changed the game in terms of how companies think about and how individuals are demanding a different way of living, a different way of working. But the pandemic had a kind of jolting accelerant, into this, into the mix, as everyone who could or who had to began to just radically shift the time and places that they were doing their work, and the whole issue of how you manage the boundaries, both physical and psychological, among and between the different roles that you play in life, particularly work and family, became one that everyone was dealing with in a new way, requiring a rethinking of the relationships among and between the different parts of life, and so the need for proven models, and we've done a lot of research now on what works and what doesn't in our delivery of this total leadership program in many, many different formats in different countries around the world. The book is in a dozen different languages. We had something that could help. And so there's been an increased demand in models like this. And now, of course, there are many others out there,
Sure.
Which is a great thing.
Surely over the past 20 years, certain companies have been buying into total leadership, certain managers have been buying into it, but now it's really in stark relief as we see, a few companies have tried to draw a line in the sand and say, we're essentially going to work like it's still 2019. You're going to come in the office, you're going to do this,
Oh.
require that. And they're getting a lot of pushback from it. And the majority of companies seem to be, I guess to say, doing the right thing, or at least being quiet about, whatever they're doing. But at least from the people I talked with, the company dads and the lead dads, the working moms, those groups, those people in their 20s and throughout their 30s, maybe in the early 40s, they got to be home, they got to see the pandemic, and they are thinking completely differently about the way they want to work going forward. They're going to be highly productive, very smart, well educated, but they're not going in 5 days a week. But then you have some of these, super senior managers who are still trying to figure out this massive change, in the world. How do you reconcile those, two groups? How do you make this work? Because we're not going back to 2019.
No, that's for sure. And no one's figured out, what the right path is. And I think it's going to be different in different industries, depending on the kinds of technologies that are used to do work and what's required in terms of interdependence among people getting work done together. But the expectations of, so many people as to, an organization's claim to their physical presence are now very, very different. Like, hey, I've proven that I can deliver what I need to do, working remotely from my mountain retreat or wherever I am. And so why would I be commuting? How does that help? And so how do I reconcile it? Well, partly it's generational differences, when I was your age or back in my day, and, that's the way it is in institutions, organizations that are deeply rooted in tradition. And, you see that in medicine, you see that in law, especially, those professions where, the people who are running those organizations grew up in just a radically different environment. And, not just in those professions, but the expectations for what an ideal employee look like are rooted in a pre-pandemic, pre-digital era. The smart companies are experimenting and don't claim to have an answer, but are clearly and genuinely interested in innovating to try to find new solutions that work and that work for all parties. And I think that's the only sensible approach here is let's try some form of hybrid, or let's try, everybody's got to get back in the office. Let's see what that looks like. Let's get data on what's working and what's not from, the constituents who matter, especially with respect to our performance, and let's keep adjusting. But to make, across the board claims of we work better when we're all together, so everybody's got to be in the office now, that is just bound to fail unless you're in a labor market where you don't care if people are leaving or if they're, quiet quitting, as the term of art is used today. Yeah. So I think it's important to be experimenting.
Yeah, I hear that, and many things come to mind, but one is, one of the companies, Goldman Sachs, the head of Goldman Sachs has been very, for them about getting people back in the office. And I know from what my wife does, I know from other people I talk to, top performers are leaving. Top female performers are leaving because they have lots of other options. And I look at this and I say to myself, well, your bottom 30% are never going to leave no matter what you tell them to do, because where would they go? Nobody wants them. But that top, 20%, they have options. And I wonder, I know now you're not teaching undergraduates much, but you are still teaching in the executive MBA program. And so for listeners, an executive MBA program for listeners is a program where people have experience working, and oftentimes they're working and going back to school at the same time. And
almost all are.
Yeah. And so those are people who are literally applying what they're learning in your class to their jobs pretty quickly. When you think of the classes of executive MBAs you've had, 2019, 2020, 21, 22, and now today, how has their outlook changed as, coming, pre-COVID and now, some people call what we're in now the next normal, but this kind of, post-COVID lockdown world, how have, their outlooks changed as students, or the questions they're asking, how have those questions changed?
Well, I started teaching this course in 2003 in our executive MBA programs, and in both Philadelphia and San Francisco, where we have campuses. So the San Francisco group tends to be a little different than the East Coast group. The people in San Francisco, many of them are in the tech world or media, whereas on the East Coast, it's more financial services, consulting. So it's somewhat different industries. But what we briefly talked about earlier is certainly something that I have observed, and that is that there's a more genuine questioning of, well, is this how I want to be living now? And I liked being around for breakfast with my kids. So
let me interrupt you there, because a lot of these people coming into the executive MBA programs are managers. They're what might have at one point been called middle managers. Probably emerging leaders is a better term for them. So they're actually not just responsible for themselves, but they're responsible for people who report to them. So how has that introspection about their own situation, how has that impacted or been reflected upon their management styles, the way that they're treating the people who report to them?
Well, there is a range. There are entrepreneurs, there are inventors, there are lots of physicians on the East Coast in our class. So, but yes, these are people in their mid-30s on average who have advanced in terms of supervisory management responsibility and have been successful in that. And what I hear from them is that, part of why they are interested in learning this model and practicing it is so that they can help their people who are making new kinds of claims to their own time and attention and where they invest in. So they want to be more facile and more effective in being able to help their people to experiment in ways that are mutually enriching. And part of the long-standing problem with the whole work-life movement, which I saw 30 plus years ago when I first got into it, and I think still exists, but to a lesser degree, and is certainly something that I've been working on this whole time, is to get beyond zero-sum thinking and to instead look for ways to create value in all the different parts by just being smarter about how you invest your attention and look systematically at whose interests you're serving. So, a lot of the work-life conversation is about, I need something from you,
right,
dear boss. You need to give it to me.
Yeah.
As opposed to, here's something that is going to be helpful to us. Can we try it?
Yeah.
If I am, working at home 3 days a week and coming into the office too, let's just try that for, some period of time and see if that works for you.
It's a simple reframing of it. It's a simple reframing of it, sort of, behavioral finance 101. And it's, I can see where it'd be a lot more effective. This is going to be better for the company if we work this way. There's been one.
Or let's just try it. Right.
Exactly. Yeah. And if
frame change as an experiment rather than a lifelong demand. You are never going to see me on Fridays from now on. If you don't like that, Goldman Sachs, I'm going to JP Morgan. Okay.
I have it in my contract right here. No Fridays.
Yeah. And that just doesn't work because every situation's different. What you want to be doing, and I would encourage listeners to think about this and to try it themselves, is if you want to make a change that you need, to keep your family life intact, or keep yourself sane, by taking the piano lessons that you need to take, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Or, invest in working on climate change, as part of your, portfolio of activities, whatever matters, to be thinking about, as you say, to frame it in terms of how, by doing this, do you become a more valuable asset to the company?
Mm-hmm.
When you ask yourself that question, which most people don't,
yeah,
you are bound to find an answer if that activity or that initiative really matters to you. So you start to find those ways in which what you're doing in one part of your life can be of value to the other parts, and that's a big part of what we train people to do, to shift their mindset so that they're seeing where they're being a better father makes them a better manager, for example.
But this is so interesting because, it's a two-way street. And a good friend of mine sold his business to a larger company, and he's on the senior leadership team there. But that company is mandating the people be in the office 4 days a week, but you can pick the 4 days. Well, nobody picks Friday. So essentially, you're mandating that they come in 4 days a week. Nobody comes in Friday, and people barely work on Fridays because they're so disgruntled and burned out. They go and do something fun. So this has been awesome. We're coming toward the end of the time, but I don't want to leave without talking about at least your most recent book. But as I think about, I don't want to read too much into it, but in 20 years, it seems like you're getting a little, at least from the titles of these books, a little bit more optimistic. Because the first book is Work and Family, Allies or Enemies. What happens when business professionals confront life choices? That's a little daunting. The next one, Baby Bust, New Choices for Men and Women in Work and Family. That's showing a little softer. But the most recent one, Parents Who Lead, the leadership approach you need to parent with purpose, fuel your career, and create a richer life. I mean, is it fair to say that they represent an evolution of your research on this topic? They're certainly getting to be kinder, gentler titles as we go through the years.
Yes, I think so. And what has also transpired over those years is the development of this total leadership approach, which is a very optimistic one. It basically asserts that if you're smart about it, you can find ways to create more freedom in your life, to live how you want to live, and to thrive. And it's using leadership principles that we know are important. Having a clear sense of what matters to you, knowing who matters to you, investing in those relationships, developing support, actively, and then trying new ways of getting things done that are not just about you. That's what leaders do, and that's what's necessary for us as business professionals, but also as families. And so, the early research was really more focused on documenting how people are thinking, how they're acting, how they feel about these issues across generations, how those issues are playing out differently for people at different life stages, and offering a set of ideas for action that could be undertaken to address the questions that we face as a society, in our businesses, in our families and communities. What we've done with the total leadership approach, which we then adopted for families. So we took what we knew about this total leadership model for individuals, and largely based on what I was hearing from students and clients who were saying, I'm reading this book along with my spouse. You really should write a book for families doing this stuff together, because we're doing that.
Yeah.
And my publisher, Harvard Business Press, saying, we need a book for parents. Please write it. And I said, no, I'm done writing books. It's way too hard. I don't think I want to do this anymore. They said, no, you got to do this. Okay. I'll do that if you agree that I can do this with a writing partner who is a person who I've been doing research with for 20 years, who is herself a mother of young children and a professor and research scholar, Alyssa Westring. So we partnered on this, and we took the total leadership approach, and we went into the lab with families, well, people parenting together. And we took those same tools and we made it for them to do together as a unit, and to do the work of describing their individual and collective vision for the future, their values as a unit, as a family and individually, and how those come together, and doing the work of peer-to-peer coaching throughout all this, identifying the most important people, what their mutual needs and interests are, having conversations with them and doing experiments, is all about, making things better, helping to develop your capacity to bring others along with you to a better tomorrow. And with Parents Who Lead, that is that is the main purpose of that book. And I think it is more focused on that action. So I agree. It is a kind of more actively optimistic approach that is very practical. People are often skeptical because, so many people have been reared on the concept of you've got to sacrifice in order to be successful. And of course, that is at some level true. I'm not, a Pollyanna. This is all, rooted in research and quite practical as a model for, well, what if you didn't assume trade-off among the different parts of life? What if you instead assumed, where is there a possibility for me to take action within my purview, that I can actually do that might make things better all the way around? If I think in those terms, then I'm a lot more likely to achieve those ends. And that's what families do with Parents Who Lead. It's pretty exciting and a lot of fun.
Stu Friedman, thank you so much for being my guest on the Company of Dads podcast. This has been a great conversation.
Well, thank you so much, Paul. It's been great to be with you. I appreciate it.